Well, a couple of weeks ago in this school here in Laleham, they had a careers day, and the young people were invited to dress up as a career. My daughter Lydia picked something particularly niche. She wanted to go as an open doors field worker, which, if you have no idea what that is, working with persecuted Christians overseas in dangerous countries. Doesn't sound ideal. Toby wanted to be a policeman. That's slightly better, isn't it? Well, we were chatting at dinner about what we want to be when we're grown up. Eliza, my third, said she wants to be a mermaid princess, perhaps the hardest of them all. Well, I then said, well, when I grow up, I want to be, and then I dreamed a helicopter pilot or something that I could be. Of course, I was just being silly. Except, was I? Was I being silly? Because I've still got growing up to do. I've still got a trajectory of my life that is going somewhere. So who do I want to be when I am older? And all of you, who do you want to be when you are older? Because whether young or further along in years, we are all growing, changing. We're going somewhere. To be human is to change. None of us are who we were a decade ago. So as you think about your future, what would you like to be? Now, perhaps as you think about your future self, you imagine great health, or kind of good fitness, always getting around and doing things, making the most of life and travel. Perhaps you think of friendships or family. Or maybe it's more about the character you want to have. Peaceful, joyful, patient, kind. Perhaps even you can picture someone that you know or have known, and you want to be a bit like them when you're older. And perhaps even there's some dark or unhealthy habit that you hope you'll have finally shaken. What do you want to be when you're older? But then how? How do we get there? How can I get from here to there? Well, easy, right? We can just make some changes. We can look in the mirror and make that change. Really? Though, can we? Is it as easy as that? I think we like to think we're the masters of our own fate, that we can decide who we are, what we're going to be, but is that actually true? In reality, I think there are lots of forces that work on us that change us. So there's our relationships, who we spend time with, who without thinking we think like, talk like, vote like, spend money like, we dress like. You know, when I got married 13 years ago, it was made clear to me very quickly that I wasn't going to be wearing kind of baggy clothes anymore, that it had to be kind of slim fit from now on. My wife, Hannah, dressed the same. This is potentially a slightly dangerous story. But until recently, when she came home with some, what are they called? Barrel leg jeans. Do you know about this? I didn't know about this. And so, of course, having been taught about slim fit, I objected. There's no way. It's ridiculous. Until I went to Win. And it turns out all the teenage girls wearing these barrel leg jeans, even flares. Flares have made a comeback. Anyway, that is a big aside. Back to the point. So there's our relationships, but it's not just who we're with, it's where we are. It's our environment, our westernness, or our Britishness, or our southernness, even our Spelthornness. It's part of who we are. And then these days, it's not just our geography, it's our digital environment, those carefully created algorithms that shape the life we experience. There are our habits. I mean, what does endlessly doom scrolling on our phones do to us? Or checking work emails late at night, or binge watching the latest series? What does it do to the compass of our hearts? And then the stories, the narratives we tell to make sense of life. If I asked you, what is the good life? What films or stories or books or family stories or even adverts paint that picture for you? So there are all these forces of change on us, these and countless others, things that have formed us, that are forming us, that will form us, things that are actually setting a direction for our life, for us. But is that the way we want to go? Now in Bible speak, there's a verse that speaks to this. It's Romans chapter 12, verse 2, and it speaks of this dynamic. Here's what Paul says. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So there's two options. Conform, follow the world, unintentionally. Perhaps like the teenager, perhaps becoming a bit by bit more like their friend, all that goes on at those parties. Or there's transform, intentionally setting your mind on something else, following some other direction instead. So, who do we want to be when we're older? Now, this Lent course is all about being intentional about the direction of our lives. Intentionally not just blindly following the world, but intentionally following the way we want to go, following someone else. But then who? I mean, there are plenty of options. Some who explicitly invite us to follow them, whether commentators in newspapers or on YouTube. I noticed this week a brand new section in the Times, a parenting section, inviting us to follow them in our parenting. I had a look at the top UK online influencers. I didn't know, apparently Ariana Grande, the singer, she's the most followed person in our country. And there's kind of David Beckham. And then a whole long list of people I have never heard of, but who have millions and millions of people listening to what they're saying, following their way of life. And then eventually Joe Wicks is still there on the list. Perhaps, though, that's not you. Perhaps you're just happy following your friends who seem happy. Or perhaps more negatively, you're following the guy next door over the fence with the slightly bigger house, the better car, and the bigger lawnmower, or whatever it is. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Today, and through this course, we are invited on a better way. We're invited to follow Jesus. Here are the words we had read. Come to me, Jesus says today. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. These are such precious words. They're an invitation. An invitation to follow Jesus. An invitation that changes lives. And so this morning we're simply going to unpack this invitation. Two questions. What and why? What? What is the invitation? What is it inviting us to do? And why? Why this way and not all the others? So let's do that then. Unpack this invitation. And first, what? What does Jesus actually invite us to do? And there are two phrases here that I'd like to highlight that show what he's talking about. There they are, perfect. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. The second is kind of more obvious. Learn from me. It's the student-teacher relationship, isn't it? But what about this yoke thing? A yoke is simply that kind of crossbeam you get between a couple of animals to pull a plough or carriage. For some reason I always think about the beginning of the Warhorse film. Do you remember that? Where Joey the horse, it's the wrong type of horse, but he courageously pulls this plough through a stony field. But I think actually a plough yoke needs two. But either way, whatever it is, it's that picture of servitude. It's that picture of a burden and pulling it along. But it's also a picture that had a particular meaning in Jesus' day. There's Jewish writings from the time that talk of the Old Testament law as being a bit like a yoke that you put on, a way of serving God. And I think it was in that video we had earlier that they nuanced that idea, that spoke of the rabbi-discipleship relationship. Apparently, the teaching of a rabbi would sometimes be known as a yoke that the students would kind of put on and follow. And so you can see how Jesus here is saying, come to me, be my student, follow my teachings, my yoke, be my disciple. Now, the whole of this course, as I've said, is based around this book, Practicing the Way. And we're getting really now to the core idea of this whole book. So kind of one idea, for the whole course, here it is. And it's about that idea of being a disciple. Except, in this book, he doesn't use the word disciple. Because think about it, what is a disciple? I mean, if you go to the street and say, define disciple, what do you think people would say? I don't really know. How do you define disciple? I mean, maybe a kind of Christian or something, maybe. I'm reading the Narnia books to my children at the moment. It struck me that kind of even as I'm reading that, it was only 70 years ago, but even as I'm reading that, I'm updating some of the words so they make sense to my kids. But 2,000 years ago, the word disciple, that's even longer, would have had the meaning has changed even more. The meaning is basically lost to people today. So he suggests a better translation, the word apprentice. Because we know what an apprentice is, don't we? I mean, I'm sure there are people here who were apprentices, who had older people to learn from, to watch them at their trade, to be taught and mentored until they were ready to do it themselves. And that is actually far closer to what the word disciple meant back then. Or to use John Mark Comer's categories, they're helpfully on the front of the book. To be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, to do as he did. That's to be an apprentice of Jesus. That's what it means to follow Jesus. And I want to just dwell on this idea, because so far you're probably like, yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. But let's just think about that for a moment. Did you know the word Christian to describe a follower of Jesus only actually appears in the Bible 3 times? But this word for apprentice, it comes 269 times in the Bible. Many times in Jesus' own mouth. But then I wonder, you might call yourself a Christian, but would you call yourself Jesus' apprentice? It's an interesting question because, in a way, the word Christian kind of gives us a bit of a let-out. It's quite a passive word. Now, in many ways, that's a great thing. I was reading a comment article, I'm going to mention it again later, in the Times yesterday, that talked about how the Church of England often, it doesn't offer many demands on people. It's one of the reasons it's kind of attractive to some. And in a sense, there is this kind of simplicity to being a Christian. That all you have to do is simply come to Jesus, ask for forgiveness, that you get forgiveness. That's kind of simple. And there is a kind of binariness to Christianity as well. You are simply washed by the blood of Christ once and for all. It's done. But then this word apprentice is far more active, and it's far more in the mouth of Jesus. John Mark Comer drives this point home. Here's a quote from him. The problem is, he says, in the West we have created a cultural milieu where you can be a Christian but not an apprentice of Jesus. Simon and Andrew, remember them in their boats? They were fishing. And Jesus came along the shore and he called to them. He said, come, follow me. And what did they do? They left their nets. Their whole lives were changed. They spent their whole lives for this one aim of being apprentices to Jesus. And it's the same for us. So that's the invite. Follow Jesus. Be his apprentices. And it's a wonderful invite, by the way, just to say. It's an invite that can change our lives, even change the world. There's a quote that I really like. It's a bit of kind of vision in this book that I thought I'd share with you. It's quoting a guy called Dallas Willard, who wrote on spiritual formation. Hear what he said. Hopefully this is also up on the screen. The greatest issue facing the world today, with all its heartbreaking needs, and there's a lot of needs at the moment particularly, is whether those who identified as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of heavens into every corner of human existence. Do you agree? Maybe not. I think so. John Mark Comer certainly agrees. Hear what he says. I could not agree more, he writes. The greatest issue facing the world today is not climate change, surveillance, capitalism, human rights, or the spectre of nuclear war, as utterly crucial as these things are. But can you imagine how many of these problems would effectively be solved overnight if the billions of living humans who identified as Christians all became apprentices of Jesus? Well, you can tell me what you think about that afterwards if you agree. But that's the invite. What is it? To follow Jesus, to be apprentices of him. But then we must move on to that final question, why? Why should I? Why follow Jesus? Why him, not, we'll just follow the culture? Or whatever other thing we want to follow. Well, let's get back to Jesus' words and 3 reasons that I think this verse gives us to follow Jesus. Number 1, it's an invite for the weary and burdened. I wonder how your self-improvement plans have gone. Perhaps you had New Year's resolutions that were short-lived. In fact, why do I wonder how your life is going? Is it going as you'd always hoped? Or are you perhaps weary and burdened? Well, this is an invite for you. Then second, number 2, it's an invite that's just better. It's a better invite. It's a better offer. It's an invite of a better life. See what Jesus promises. Here he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Not like the Pharisees who were listening to Jesus saying this originally, who their burdens were heavy. They piled rule upon the people. But Jesus offers rest. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. Now, rest in the Bible isn't kind of doing nothing, it's not stopping activity, but it's something more. It's something more whole. I mean, really, it's the promise of the gospel. It's the satisfaction. It's instead of striving for the life you want, but having contentment. It's joy. It's that picture in Psalm 23 of going into green pastures where you eat and are satisfied, where your cup overflows. It's that picture of Psalm 63 of finding a God whose love is better than life, who satisfies our deepest longing. It's the picture of John 10:10, just earlier in this gospel, where in John 10:10, where Jesus offers life to the full. It's a better way. It is the way. Now, there's a part of me that feels like I need to prove this to you. That I could come up with some stories. Perhaps I should have done. Come up with some stories of kind of the futility in our world. Come up with some stories of how Jesus' way is better. And maybe for another sermon that would be good. But I'm not going to do that today for 2 reasons. First, because I think there's something going on in our culture at the moment that's actually doing this for us. That actually people seem to be working out the futility and emptiness of, everything on their own. Like this comment piece I mentioned yesterday in the Times. It was Giles Coren in the Times, if you know him. He writes these funny but surprisingly kind of deep pieces. And he wrote yesterday this: I know what I'm giving up for Lent this year: atheism. And he hasn't, got all the way yet. But he's expressing something that lots of other voices are expressing. That this kind of assumption of atheism is slightly crumbling. That actually people are wondering, is more going on? I hear this from other churches, particularly men just turning up and wanting to find out more. I think the tide is turning. It's exciting, I think. But actually, secondly, the second reason I don't want to kind of prove it to you is because actually this is an invite, an invitation to you to try it out for yourself. Whether that means going deeper in a mature faith or taking those first few steps of apprenticeship yourself. Might there be a better way? Am I actually living the life I most truly desire, or might there be something better? Not just like one of those 10 foods to eat or 5 exercises that will change everything, but a whole way of life from the maker of life. There's one third reason to follow Jesus. I think it's the most compelling. It's that little phrase in the middle, for I am gentle and humble in heart. We started with that question, who do I want to be when I'm older? Fit and healthy, sure. Friends, yeah. Family, certainly. But really, I just want to be like Jesus. I want to be gentle like him, humble like him, for there is no one in human history who is more gentle, more kind, more approachable, more humble, more lowly, more loving in heart. There is no better mentor, no better role model than him. Who else better to be like than him for a satisfying and happy life? And if I want to be like him, well then who better to follow? So that's the invitation. Onto this course, onto a life of apprenticeship to Jesus. There's no better way to go. And in our midweek groups, we're going to think more about what that means. We're going to pick up on that first point, be with Jesus, about how that's the first step. I mean, it's not just the first step, it's the 10,000th step. You never really go beyond being with Jesus as his apprentice. But in our world, there are so many distractions. We fill every moment with noise and screens and activity. We're perhaps the most distracted generation in history. And so in our groups, we're going to think about solitude. Simply, how do we make space to be with Jesus in our lives? If you're not signed up, do sign up. Do just have a chat with me or Andy. Today's the day to sign up. They start tomorrow. It'd be a really great thing to do. And it's going to be really practical. For me, one of the steps I've taken over the last few weeks is just leaving my phone always downstairs, so that when I kind of go upstairs, I'm not scrolling by default. I'm stepping away from messages and emails and news and Facebook and all those things. And then in the morning, I'm not waking up to distraction, but waking up to God. I mean, think about these lights. They're pretty annoying at certain times of the day. You can't get into Leyland. But at other times of the day, particularly from the north, 5-minute delay I could do with. And I've been thinking, for that 5-minute delay, I'm going to turn off my radio, pause, because we're always hurrying. And actually we could do with going a little bit slower sometimes. And using that time to be with God. I'm sure it'll be different things for you. That's just a taster. More to come in your groups. But for now, simply an invitation. Perhaps you've been following Jesus Christ for decades. Well, Jesus says to you, come to me. There's always more to learn. We're never complete. My yoke is easy. Perhaps you're new to the faith, though. Perhaps you're excited about Christian things, but you don't really know what you're doing. Well, Jesus says, come to me. Learn from me. Learn the restful life. And perhaps you're not yet following Jesus. Well, the invitation to you is the same. Come to me. Learn a better way. I've got something better for you. Come and see for yourself. And to all of us he says, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So come. Come. Amen.
Amen.